September 24, 2016, 1:46 a.m., Austin, Texas, Riverside Lofts on South Lamar. A woman in a denim jacket and white jeans slips through the lobby door on another resident's courtesy, head down, arms folded, the city still humming outside like a neon river. Her name is Marina Ellis, 28, a digital media manager who remembers everyone's birthdays and brings cupcakes to meetings. 10 minutes later, a night guard walks the same corridor, hands at his belt, eyes on the corners. What happened to Marina Ellis between this camera and her front door? 2 years later, a small legal motion and a missing piece of hardware will reopen everything. Austin keeps secrets after midnight. Which one is this? The lobby camera blinks once, then holds steady, as if it too is listening. Elevator doors reflect the blue of the exit sign. The carpet bears a darker stripe where footsteps always turn left toward the stairwell. On the tape, Marina glances back only once. You can almost read the calculation on her face. 4 floors, keypad lock, no phone, no key fob, just a short walk and a longer exhale. She had peeled away from friends near Rainy Street after last call. They were supposed to meet again for breakfast at 10. It was their pact after big nights: eggs, coffee, retally the jokes, reset the week. By noon that day, no texts. By late afternoon, still nothing. Her car, a silver hatchback with a dent over the right taillight, sits in the same slot near the stairwell, facing the concrete berm and the live oaks that throw spidery shade. On the back seat, an unopened gift bag with tissue paper like a small cloud. Her best friend, Ava, stands in the lot with her phone to her ear and the hard, bracing tone of someone trying not to jump ahead. "Welfare check," she says. "We're worried." The security office sends someone to meet them at the 3rd floor door. The deadbolt is steady. The hallway smells like citrus cleaner and laundry soap. The unit looks normal in a way that pinches the throat. A water glass with 2 lipstick arcs on the rim. A pair of flats by the couch pointing at nothing in particular. The thermostat still set to 72. The officers call her name in that careful way that lowers volume rather than raises it. A bedroom lamp is on. The closet door is ajar. The bathroom door is closed. This is as far as the camera will ever see, and this is where the questions begin for real. Entry appears to have been gained without force, the report will note. Nothing looks ransacked. But something off sits in the air like a hesitation you can feel with your skin. Investigators always start with time. They build a line, then hunt for kinks. 1:46 a.m. Marina enters. 2:06 a.m. A streak of motion at the stairwell, the same denim, hair tied back, moving faster, almost a run. 2:25 a.m. The night guard, Kyle Mercer, heads with her toward the 1st floor parking area, an escort she seems to accept and then abandon. She gestures with both hands, palms open, as if saying, "Wait, I remember." They re-enter the building together. After that, the frames lose her. Not because the cameras stop, because hallways and doors are good at swallowing witnesses. Policy says night staff aren't supposed to carry anything out for residents. Policy also says logs should align with what the lenses catch. At 6:36 a.m., with the sun just bending over the river, a camera on level 2 records Kyle stepping into view carrying 2 black trash bags. He moves without hurry. He disappears toward the ramp where his car is parked, then returns at 6:38 a.m., hands empty, keys in his right hand, head down. His shift ends at 6. The door log shows no anomalies. The keypad system in this building is old enough to click, young enough to remember what it's told. People underestimate how much a building knows. The panel in the security office hums. The server closet is a small wind of fans and dust. Off-site backups blink a quiet green. In those first 48 hours, detectives sign 3 subpoenas. 1 for the cameras, 1 for the guards' devices, 1 for the access control data that lives like a pulse in the wire. They knock on doors and ask for small things. What you heard at 2 in the morning, whether you saw someone waiting by the elevator, why you didn't mention the buzzing you noticed earlier that week. Memory is a fickle ally. It turns on details for reasons that have nothing to do with truth and everything to do with fear. Ava keeps her phone face up on the table at the station. She scrolls through the week before. Photos from a team lunch, 2 voice notes from Marina about a story idea, a reminder for a charity 5K they'd signed up for. She is not trying to be helpful, she is trying to keep her friend moving forward by proxy. The detective across from her is patient, and then he is precise. He asks about habits most of us don't notice we have. Did Marina close doors behind her? Did she leave lights on? Did she carry keys in her right hand because of a scar on her left? He is building a model of a person so the empty spaces will announce themselves when they appear. No one wants to believe that nothing visible can be everything important. The keypad is an afterthought to most of us. A code we reuse, a pattern our fingers make without thinking. In the coming days, numbers will matter. So will the absence of numbers. So will a laptop search made before dawn that seems like curiosity until you plot it on a line. There is a version of this story in which the building did enough and the people inside it did more. There is another where one person watched and waited and exploited the space between help and harm. 2 years later, a courtroom will try to reconstruct a night that refuses to stay still. For now, all we have is a series of doors, a clock that will not slow down, and a friend staring at a gift bag that never made it to the party. A single, simple question pulls the rest behind it like a rope through a knotted room. What, exactly, happened between 2:06 and 2:25 a.m., and who else knew the code? Detectives built the first 48 hours like a scaffold and climbed. They started with what the building knew. At Riverside Lofts, the security system doesn't just watch, it remembers. A server offsite mirrors every camera, a quiet redundancy that survives power flickers and hurried deletions. By mid-morning on September 25th, investigators secured those backups and pulled the exact corridors Marina Ellis crossed. The lobby view was clean. The stairwell camera had a narrow field, humming under a fatigue of motion. The parking lens caught a slice of ramp and 3 stalls, including the one where Marina's hatchback sat, unblinking. The tape didn't panic, it simply told time. The timeline held. 1:46 a.m., Marina enters with another resident. 2:06 a.m., a fast blur past the stairwell lens, ponytail high, denim jacket unbuttoned, a hand on the rail. 2:25 a.m., the night guard, Kyle Mercer, meets her near the first floor exit to check for keys in her car. They reappear inside minutes later. After that, she vanishes from every angle. The cameras didn't fail. The hallways did what hallways do, swallowed sound and faces and turned them into echoes. The absence became its own kind of evidence. Inside Marina's unit, the scene resisted interpretation. No forced entry. No overturned drawers. A glass of water, 2/3 full, on the kitchen counter, beads of condensation rejoining themselves. The bathroom door closed. The bedroom lamp on. Officers documented quiet anomalies without enlarging them. A cleaning caddy cabinet left open, a faint citrus trace in air that should have smelled like last night's hairspray and dryer sheets. They spoke softly, as if volume could bruise whatever fragile sense remained. They did not speculate. They measured. They collected. They stepped back to the hallway and let the clock keep talking. Ava waited in a small interview room with a paper cup of coffee she didn't drink. She had called the welfare check, had circled the lot twice, had counted the seconds between rings when Marina didn't answer. The detective across from her was kind in the way experienced people are, calm, specific, relentless about detail. What is her code routine, he asked, left hand or right? Did she ever share the number over text? Has she missed breakfast before? Ava scrolled to a pinned thread labeled, Saturdays. Texts full of memes and grocery lists and gym jokes. The last message was a laughing selfie from earlier in the night. It looked suddenly like a photograph of weather right before it breaks. The building's keypad system mattered. It was old enough to click and record, young enough to be guessed by someone who understood people's habit of choosing 4 digits with meaning. A technician dusted the pad and saw what technicians often see. 3 numbers worn more than the rest, a 4th with fresh oils across its face. There is a logic to touch. There is also a logic to search history. Under warrant, digital forensics reviewed the guard's laptop and phone. At 5:02 a.m., a query, how to override a residential keypad lock, brand and series included. The words sat on the screen like a date circled in ink. Policy said night staff should clock out at 6. At 6:36 a.m., a second-floor camera watched Kyle carry 2 black trash bags toward his car. He did not move like someone late for bed. He moved like a person finishing a task on his way to another. At 6:39 a.m., he returned without the bags, keys in hand, head down, and left the frame. Investigators canvassed the route from the ramp to South Lamar, mapping municipal cameras, private doorbells, any lens that might have seen a man and 2 bags crossing into the window where the city wakes. The trash receptacles closest to the building were empty by the time a warrant arrived. Trucks had already done the quiet work of erasing. Upstairs, a neighbor remembered a different sound, a burst of keypad beeps around 2:28 a.m., the kind of impatient rhythm people tap when numbers keep missing. He hadn't reported it. People don't report noises that resolve into silence. Another resident mentioned an elevator door that seemed to open to no one, twice, as if responding to a call it could not deliver. Small things, easy to dismiss alone. Placed on a line, they aligned with minutes the cameras could not explain. This is where an investigation asks the living for help staying with the dead. If you care about careful, human-centered work, keep walking with us as we follow the evidence across screens and skin and what we choose to ignore. Not every detail will be dramatic. Not every turn will satisfy. But one of them will hold. The question is whether we recognize it when it arrives and whether we're willing to adjust our memory to fit what's true rather than what's easy. In the days that followed, the story grew both smaller and more precise. A code that could be learned. A door that opened without splintering. A building that did its job, and yet somehow still failed the only person who needed it most. Investigators would return to the unit with a new set of swabs and a slower eye, convinced something subtle had been left out of place by someone who thought no one looked under things. Which surface keeps the print the longest? The return to Marina's apartment was deliberate, almost reverent, like stepping into a page that had been turned too quickly. Detectives brought a slower pace and new eyes. Everything that first looked ordinary felt curated now, as if someone had tidied while the clock was racing. The water glass remained at its post, the rim catching light. The bedroom lamp still glowed like an unanswered question. They worked the room outward, not for drama, but for the kind of quiet proof that survives bleach and bravado. Under bright, angled flashlights, they mapped touch, door edge, light switch, dresser knob, the shallow bowl where Marina kept hair ties and coins. Each surface told a partial story, a testimony cut short by a cloth. Forensic techs treat bathrooms as paradoxes. Too clean can be as loud as too messy. Steam coats, then vanishes, but residue lingers where hands anchor themselves. A senior technician knelt at the toilet, not because it seemed obvious, but because it almost never does. On the underside of the lid, a smooth surface most people never consider, his powder bloomed into tiny constellations. He lifted 3 latent prints and a partial. The room didn't change temperature, but the air shifted. It felt like someone had finally stopped talking over the music. Next came the keypad. A gel lift along the numbers showed a pattern that supported the earlier suspicion, 3 digits worn by habit, a 4th touched less often but recently. The combination lived in the oils people leave behind when they're confident. On paper, the most likely sequences looked almost trivial. In life, those 4 numbers guard everything. Down the hall, a neighbor confirmed the late-night beeping, a burst of entries at 2:28 a.m., the tempo of error. In the parking area, a tech measured a faint outsole impression near where Kyle Mercer had walked at dawn. The tread was uncommon, a specific hex pattern with a narrow heel. No one claimed to have seen it placed. It didn't matter. The floor carried the memory. Digital forensics filled gaps the hallways left. Kyle's phone, imaged under warrant, revealed the 5:02 a.m. search, how to bypass a residential keypad, the brand and series spelled out. His laptop web history echoed the same query 2 days earlier, followed by a video thumbnail from a trade forum. The video had been opened for 21 seconds and closed, as if the point wasn't to learn, but to confirm something already known. Investigators compared his shift log to camera frames and saw what policy had missed. A guard who left when the clock allowed it, not when the building did. Evidence bags multiplied with a kind of methodical calm. A pair of shoes recovered from Kyle's place would later align with the hex tread. The match would never be declared perfect. Science seldom loves absolutes, but the probability narrowed enough to matter. A faint, linear scuff on Marina's hardwood, perpendicular to the hallway, marked a path from the bathroom back toward the bed. It was the sort of line a shoe edge can make when someone pivots on instinct, not on care. Nothing here shouted. It didn't need to. It layered until it weighed. Ava returned to give a formal statement, her voice steady in the way grief sometimes is after the first storm passes. She described the small rituals that define a person better than titles do: Marina's habit of tucking receipts into her back pocket, the way she double-checked doors without looking, the code digits tied to a date that made her smile. She stopped when the detective asked if anyone else would know those numbers. It wasn't shock on her face, it was dread made visible. In any other week, the code was a convenience. In this one, it felt like a confession passed along by accident. Back at the lab, the latent prints from the underside of the toilet lid were digitized, their minutiae mapped and compared. Print databases are not magic. They are patience and statistics. The first pass narrowed to a few candidates. A second pass, using a higher resolution scan and manual comparison by an examiner who'd done this work for 25 years, tightened the circle. The name that rose was already in the case file. There is a particular quiet that follows that kind of hit, part relief, part anger that it took this long to see what the room tried to say. Detectives invited Kyle to sit down again. They did not accuse. They asked him to walk them through his route, his timing, his reasons for carrying bags that were not his to carry. He said he was helping custodial, then he said he was taking out hallway trash, then he said he couldn't recall which door he'd checked first. None of it changed the clock or the camera or the residue under a lid he could not explain. In the margin of a legal pad, a detective wrote 2 words and boxed them twice. Controlled access. The case that began with a camera blink had become a calculus of touch. Not a single piece of video showed the moment everyone wanted. The prosecution would never have the dramatic clip that erases doubt in a heartbeat. What they had was stronger in a quieter way. Key timelines, a search that woke before dawn, a tread print nobody else wore, and the fragile fingerprint a careless hand left under a surface most people never see. Then the print matched a man who swore he'd never entered. The fingerprint match didn't arrive with fanfare. It landed in a plain email to a plain inbox, the way answers often do when the work is relentless enough. The examiner's note was cautious, professional, exact about points of similarity. It was also decisive. The latent print from the underside of Marina Ellis's toilet lid, the surface nobody remembers to wipe when they're thinking about everything else, aligned with the right thumb of Kyle Mercer. In the bullpen, conversation paused for a beat, then kept moving. No victory laps. Just motion, to a judge's chambers, to a stack of affidavits, to the kind of long afternoon that ends with a signature and a door knocked under a sky that hasn't decided if it's going to rain. Kyle answered in sweats, a t-shirt with the logo of a local gym. He didn't ask why they were there. He knew the cadence of warrants as well as anyone who's worked nights in a building where trouble doesn't always announce itself. He sat where they asked him to sit. He consented to a second interview because people who believe they've explained enough often think one more round will make the loop close. The room was cool on purpose. The detectives spoke on a low register, the way you do with someone who has to hear themselves. They started with routes and clocks. They moved to policy and practice. Then they opened the folder and placed the printout down between them like a paper with its own gravity. Kyle looked at the image and said he'd carried hallway trash as a favor to custodial. He said he'd been trained to check on residents who seemed disoriented. He said he would never enter a private unit without cause. When they asked how his thumbprint ended up on the underside of a lid in an apartment he claimed he'd never entered, he said nothing for a long time. Silence can be an answer without being a confession. In the hallway outside, a copier hummed. Somewhere down the block a delivery truck braked hard enough for everyone to feel it in their teeth. In the lab, the outsole impression from the parking level received its own day in court long before any juror saw it. The hex pattern, the narrow heel, the small nick under the arch made a constellation that matched a pair of work shoes recovered at Kyle's apartment, size aligned with his time cards and uniform records. No one claimed the print was perfect. That is not how science behaves. But the probability tightened like a knot pulled from both ends. The digital piece, though, that was cleaner. The 5:02 a.m. search for how to override the exact keypad series installed at Riverside Lofts, plus a forum video opened earlier that week and closed at 21 seconds, plus a midnight thread on master codes that management can generate. Curiosity alone didn't wear like this on the timeline. Ava arrived at the station that evening with a sweater around her shoulders and the look of someone who has learned how to breathe inside bad news. She asked if it mattered that Marina had changed her code 2 weeks after moving in. It did. She asked if it mattered that staff sometimes knew when residents forgot their numbers. It did. She asked if any of this would change the end. The detective didn't answer the last one. He asked her to tell him, once more, where Marina kept her key fob when she did have it, whether she wrote codes down, whether she had said anything about the guard beyond a polite hello. Ava remembered a small annoyance Marina had brushed off. A night when the elevator doors opened and Kyle was already there, saying he liked to make sure people got to their floors safely. It sounded helpful until it didn't. Defense attorneys don't wait for indictments to imagine a trial. Kyle retained counsel quickly. The first motions arrived within days. Suppress statements made during a voluntary interview on the grounds that he felt obligated to cooperate. Exclude the footwear comparison as prejudicial. Limit any mention of digital searches conducted off-shift. The prosecutor's response read like a dismantling. Voluntary means voluntary. The tread match is a link in a chain, not a noose. The search terms are relevant to opportunity and knowledge, not character. A hearing date was set. The judge was specific about calendars and short about patience. There is a particular unease that seeps into a case when the narrative doesn't deliver a single cinematic blow, only a sequence that builds until the air itself feels heavier. Entry without splintered wood. A code that made too much sense. A guard who walked bags to his car in the wrong hour. A print beneath a surface designed to be forgettable. Juries are human. They want to see. Prosecution teams know this. They compensate with clarity, with timelines that lay down like train tracks, with witnesses who tell small truths that add to large ones. They do not promise footage they don't have. They promise cohesion. As the indictment came down, murder, burglary, related charges reflecting what happened inside a home, Kyle kept his eyes forward and his voice steady in a way that reads as either discipline or vacancy. He posted no statements. He requested no special treatment in holding. He waited, as defendants do, inside a system built to be slow so that it can claim to be careful. Outside, at a candlelight gathering Ava helped organize by the river, someone placed a cupcake on a folding table and wrote a name on the frosting in a shaky hand. Grief is a witness too, though it's never allowed on the stand. What would a jury make of a night without a single visible act and a room that would not stop talking? Jury selection started under a sky the color of dry paper, and the courtroom felt smaller than it should have for a decision this large. People expect trials to shout. The best ones whisper and force you to lean in. The state of Texas opened with a quiet map. A line from 1:46 a.m. to 6:39 a.m., a building that saw more than anyone realized, a print where no one looks, a search typed before sunrise. They did not promise a smoking gun. They promised a sequence that resisted coincidence. In row 3, Ava folded her hands so tightly that the blood left her knuckles, then came back in slow waves. She wasn't there for theater. She was there for the version of truth that can be proven. The defense stood and reached for doubt. No video of entry, they said. No broken lock, no splintered frame, no witness who saw Kyle Mercer inside Marina Ellis's unit. A match is not a certainty, they said, pointing at the footwear comparison. A web search is not a crime. A guard carrying bags is not a confession. They were careful with tone, careful with pronouns, careful to emphasize gaps that cameras always leave. Juries listen for the word, maybe, like it's a release valve. The defense turned maybe into an arrangement of maybes you could, if you wanted, mistake for daylight. The prosecution countered with discipline. They walked the jury through the keypad system without jargon, showing how people choose numbers they can't forget, how oil and pressure reveal habits, how the pattern of worn digits points to combinations strangers can learn if they watch long enough. They explained controlled access like a locked loop. You don't need a crowbar if you have a code. They cued the 5:02 a.m. search on a screen and let the clock do the heavy lift. They layered 2 more points. An earlier video clicked at 21 seconds, a thread about master codes read in the week before. Curiosity has a rhythm. This looked like rehearsal. When the latent print hit the big monitor, the room held still. The examiner didn't sell certainty he couldn't own. He did his work: points of similarity, ridge detail, the strength of the match, the methodology, the peer review. He answered like a person who has testified enough to expect the same 10 questions from different mouths. The defense pressed, as they should. Lighting, substrate, distortion, partials. The examiner stayed inside the science and said what scientists say when they're sure enough to keep their license. This print and that thumb are the same source to a degree that matters. Kyle did not testify. The jury saw him every day anyway. Suit jacket that didn't quite fit, jaw set to neutral, eyes moving only when necessary. His attorneys built an alternative path through the night, one that let him be helpful, perhaps overzealous, but not criminal. They suggested someone else could have entered with consent at a time the cameras missed. They suggested the print might have transferred indirectly. They suggested an elevator that opens to no one is not proof of anything except malfunction. Suggestions are cheap. This trial treated them like currency and asked the jury to check the watermark. Ava's testimony was brief by design. The state did not want grief to carry weight meant for evidence. She told the jury about routines that make people legible, how Marina double-checked, how she was careful without being fearful, how she would have laughed at herself for forgetting a code and then changed it the next day. The jury watched and took notes and looked back at the timeline when she stepped down. You could feel the room realign itself around the simple things, the human-scale facts that keep elaborate theories from running wild. Closing arguments returned to the map. The state said you can build a bridge out of small, honest planks. The defense warned against paving over uncertainty. The judge read instructions that made the standard plain but not easy. Deliberations began before the afternoon light failed and ended 4 hours later with a foreperson who couldn't keep his hands from shaking as he stood. Guilty on the top count. Guilty on the related counts. The gallery did not erupt. It inhaled and then remembered how to exhale. Sentencing came 2 mornings after, when everyone looked more tired and less performative. Life without parole for the murder of Marina Ellis. Consecutive time for the other felonies. The judge thanked the jury for their care and cautioned the room against turning verdicts into absolution or spectacle. Kyle looked forward, same as always. He did not speak. A guard touched his sleeve and the tiniest flinch betrayed that he was, in fact, still inside his body. Outside, by the river, candles bobbed in paper cups and a cupcake sagged in the late sun. Ava read a statement that refused to be poetic. It was a list of thanks and a promise that Marina's name would not be reduced to a docket number. It sounded like a person stitching something that cannot be mended, because you must try anyway. Back in the empty courtroom, the exhibit list lay on counsel table like a stripped-down biography of a night. One item wasn't there and never would be: the door hardware that could have told its own story if anyone had kept it long enough to speak. What else, exactly, went missing between the evidence room and the truth everyone thought they had? 2 years is a long time to carry a night in your pocket, but appeals make time behave strangely. In February 2020, the court affirmed the verdict in a short opinion that read like a door closing softly. The panel acknowledged what the trial had already settled. The sequence mattered more than any single clip. It wasn't the footage everyone wanted. It was the footprint no one saw, the search typed before sunrise, the controlled access loop that did exactly what it was designed to do: record passage, not intent. Kyle Mercer remained where the sentence placed him. The law can be slow on purpose. Grief has no such structure. Outside criminal court, the case started again under a different name. The complaint listed Riverside Lofts, the security firm that staffed nights, and the manufacturer of the keypad series hanging on thousands of American apartment doors. The filing wasn't angry on paper. It was precise, almost clinical. It sketched emails residents sent before September 24th about a guard who lingered near elevators, who asked too many questions about routines, who framed courtesy as escort. It attached a maintenance ticket that noted a keypad glitching. then marked it resolved with a check mark and no work order. It pointed to a property memo reminding staff not to discuss default master codes over radio. Those words read like someone telling on themselves in advance. Discovery dragged the story out into the light and found new corners. An inbox search turned up a newsletter from a locksmith trade group warning that older keypads could be bypassed with a simple sequence if the installer failed to reprogram a factory code. The newsletter went to a generic property email shared by 3 supervisors, none of whom remembered reading it. A custodian's logbook mentioned 2 heavy bags removed before day shift on the 25th, then crossed the note out like an afterthought. In a different city, a lawyer sent over a deposition from another complex where a similar keypad problem had been flagged years earlier, fixed on paper, left as is on the wall. Small shocks, not because they were dramatic, but because they were so ordinary. Ava sat for a civil deposition in a room with a water cooler that clicked like a metronome. The questions were tidy, the posture polite, the stakes still enormous. She answered as she always had, with details that only someone who loved Marina could keep straight. She remembered a day when they laughed about codes that were too clever to forget and too obvious to defend. She remembered a conversation about changing the number after a move, which Marina did, and how that made them both feel like adults holding actual keys. The attorney nodded and wrote something she couldn't see. In that moment, the room felt like a machine that makes meaning out of things that will never feel meaningful again. The building's management produced a policy packet with tabs for every imaginable scenario. It looked good under fluorescent light. It also looked late. A revised section on staff boundaries had been added the month after the arrest, along with a training module on hands-off assistance and a ban on escorts above the lobby level without explicit request. A vendor contract addendum required installers to certify that all master codes were changed on day 1 and logged in a sealed file. You could read the timeline in reverse, like footprints written into a policy manual. Across Austin, other buildings scheduled quiet upgrades. New plates, new firmware, new language on doors that once told you how to check out a package and now also told you how to keep a stranger from learning your numbers. None of it changed the night, which is the part no one likes to say out loud. Civil cases end without the clean punctuation of a verdict. Settlements live in envelopes and NDAs and a press release that says nothing except that the matter has been resolved. Ava hated the phrase and understood it anyway. Resolution is a legal term. Closure is a myth people tell when they run out of language. What remains is maintenance, of memory, of procedures, of the unglamorous habits that make harm harder to convert into opportunity. On the anniversary, friends gathered at the river with paper lanterns that bobbed in the dusk. Someone read 2 sentences from a notebook Marina kept by her bed: workout goals, recipes, a list of places to hike when the weather cooled, and someone else admitted they hadn't slept well in months. Ava stood back for a minute and watched people move through grief without tripping over it. She thought about the first time they'd run together in Zilker Park, about cupcakes, about the strange tenderness of ordinary routines, about how the evidence that mattered most in the end was the kind that hides in those routines until someone learns to look. The case should have ended with the verdict, but in a more honest way, it ended here. A city that installed better locks, a company that rewrote training, a friend who kept saying her name until it felt like a form of resistance. The mystery wasn't supernatural. It was procedural, the sort of mystery that doesn't fear light because it survives through inattention. The camera never blinked. The keypad never lied. People did what people do. They assumed a building could be safe on its own. Small lesson, plain words. Safety is rarely one big decision. It lives in small choices, changing codes, reporting patterns, asking a second time when something feels off, building policies that assume temptation exists. None of this replaces what was lost. It respects it. And that respect, multiplied, is how we keep nights like this from repeating themselves.